Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. Good evening. It is 6 p.m. on Tuesday, September 30th, 2025, the last day of the month, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to call the meeting of the Peoria City Council to order and also welcome everyone here in our City Council audience as well as our listening audience on cable channel 22 and on YouTube. Madam Clerk, the council mics are open. Please call the roll.
Mayor Ali,
Present.
Councilmember Allen,
Present.
Councilmember Carmona,
Here.
Councilmember Sear,
Here.
Councilmember Gordon Young,
Present.
Councilmember Jackson, Councilmember Kelly,
Here.
Councilmember Euler,
Here.
Councilmember Riggenbach,
Here.
Councilmember Velpula, and Councilmember Vespa.
Here.
You have a quorum present, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Everyone, please join me and stand for a moment of silent prayer or silent reflection, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. Madam Clerk.
We have one town item. 25-275 is a communication from the Town Officials Budget Committee with a request to approve the proposed estimated tax levy of $1,419,540 with an estimated tax rate not to exceed 0.074315 for the town of the City of Peoria.
Councilmember Gordon Young.
I move to approve item 25-275.
Seconded by Councilmember Trustee Allen. Any discussion or questions? Trustee Sear.
Just kind of thank you, Madam Mayor. Just one question. I'm not sure who I'm supposed to ask the question to. What is the goal, to your knowledge, or who's our liaison with the town?
It may be,
Oh, I'm sorry.
the question is either to our liaison or to our township supervisor.
I don't know if you know that. I mean, we're decreasing by 5%, right, this year. What is the goal? I mean, there's obviously, we want to, spend the reserve. Do you know what the goal, her goal is as far as for how much reserve she wants to have on the books?
As much as I'd love to answer that question, why don't we ask her? She's here.
Oh, I didn't see, I'm sorry, I didn't see you over there. Sorry. Did you hear my question?
I did.
So what is your goal for the reserve down the road?
Well, the goal of the reserves is simply to get a balanced budget. From my understanding, just several years back, prior to me coming in, there was a historical reduction in funding on the reserve, on the tax levy. Typically, government entities or taxing bodies do not do a significant reduction based on what the actual budget is, the yearly budget is. However, I understand that there were some circumstances as to why that decision came about. What I have been doing over the last several years, or in the last 4 years since I've been in, is just watching where we are. So far, our reserves have come down. They're not coming down at a drastic rate, and I do not think that it would be in our best interest to see a drastic fall in the reserves, simply because our current budget, our annual budget is about 2.3 million, and our incoming funds from the levy is significantly lower than that. So we kind of have to watch those numbers very carefully to make sure that we do not end up to where we have to do a truth in taxation, and there are other things that may come about if we don't find that balance. So we're just monitoring the numbers very closely.
But would you like to see 6 months reserve, 12-month reserve a year? I mean, what would you like to see?
I do not think that 6 months is realistic. If we were to get our reserves down to 6 months, we have to think about how long it would take us to get our levy to where our actual budget is, or our actual annual budget is today. And with our annual budget being 2.3 million, that is that in the event that none of our costs increase. That's operational increase. We already know that, with Ameren, just day-to-day operations, those costs are increasing. I did do the numbers on that. If we were to do increases of 3% just to meet our levy where our annual budget is today, it would take, if we increase it by 3%, it will take close to 20 years. If we were to increase it 5%, it's going to take roughly about 12 to 13 years. So my question would be for the board, if that is the route to go to get it down to that 6-month minimum, what are we going to do during that time frame? If there is no solution that is set in place, then that is probably it will be detrimental to get it down to 6 months. 6 months is the absolute bare minimum to keep operations running, and it's just not realistic with what we have going on currently at the township.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
You're welcome. Excuse me, the motion is to approve the proposed estimated tax levy of 1.419540 with an estimated tax rate not to exceed 0.074315 for the town of the city of Peoria. Please cast your ballots. Motion passes unanimously. Madam Clerk?
We are at the city portion of the agenda. 25-276 is a communication from the City Manager and Corporation Council with a request to approve the site application for a Class H temporary outdoor liquor license for an event held by Peoria's Real Steel, Inc. for its Warehouse District Blocktoberfest fundraiser on the block of Oak Street between Adams Street and Jefferson Avenue on October 4th, 2025, from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m.
Is this you, Council Hayes?
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
You're welcome.
This is an inaugural Blocktoberfest in another part of our warehouse district that has other fundraisers like this that are operated annually, but those have been going on so long, council doesn't see them. So the 4th of July fundraiser is one that's been very popular and hugely successful that council doesn't see anymore because our ordinance provides that once council's approved it in a couple of years, then staff can do so administratively. So this is a growth of that type of an event. It's being hosted in a slightly different part of the warehouse district adjacent to Dozer Stadium. I think the organizers hope that it'll be a continuing event going forward to celebrate that part of the warehouse district as well as raise funds for a not-for-profit. We'd ask for approval of the event, and if they renew it next year and it's approved, then after that it'll be an administrative approval. Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you, Council. And I will point out, I did mention earlier that this is a special meeting of the Peoria City Council, not a regular meeting. And this particular item is time sensitive. It would have normally been on a regular meeting agenda, but because the event is scheduled for October the 4th, it was time sensitive and placed on this agenda. Can I get a motion to approve? Moved by Councilmember Kelly, seconded by Councilmember Allen. Any discussion? Please cast your ballots. Motion passes unanimously. Madam Clerk?
25-277 is a communication from the City Manager and Finance Director Comptroller with a request to approve the estimate of taxes to be levied in the amount of $34,418,810 at a rate of 1.3483 pursuant to 35 ILCS 200/18-60.
Mr. Manager?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm going to turn the floor over to our Finance Director to explain our requested levy amount.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. In front of the council tonight is our levy estimate. I always like to remind council that accepting the levy estimate is not a binding approval of the levy. This is really just to have this on the table for consideration. The levy itself, as the title shows, has an overall levy subject to truth and taxation at $34,418,810 at the rate of 1.3483. I think the key components of that is the levy estimate in front of you maintains that rate for the truth and taxation component. And let me just take a step back real quick to kind of explain the difference. Really, our aggregate levy is around $39 million. For both the city portion as well as the library portion, we have debt that automatically is levied at the time that the bonds are issued. And so that is an amount above and beyond and is already set. So that's the $39 million amount. The amount that's subject to truth and taxation is really those operational levies. So for the city, it's going to be, really for us, it's mostly the pension plan. For the library, it's going to be their operational funds. But I think the key in this conversation is, as we have in the past in bringing this to council, we are maintaining the rate as to what the final rate was once the county levied the taxes for the 2025 fiscal year. The one thing I will point out is when we had gone through this process last year, we had assumed around a 7.2% increase in overall EAV. The final number was closer to 8.2. So we actually saw our rate drop slightly from an original estimate of 1.3511. And so we are not recommending taking it back and trying to capture what we did not capture last year. We're simply asking to maintain that truth and taxation rate at the current rate. In terms of overall impact, the overall dollar amount of the levy increase is 6.56%. That is equal to what our estimate is from the county at this point of what overall property values are going to grow next year. So that's where that comes from. The aggregate levy, though, however, I think just wanted to kind of make it clear to council, we actually will see a slight decrease in our rate next year if this was to be approved. Because the city's portion we always maintain at $2 million. we're not capturing any growth on that $2 million. It stays as it is, and so that lowers the rate. Also, from the library side of it, they're getting close to their bonds being paid off, and so we're starting to see reduced payments at the end of this. And so their number is also dropping. So the overall aggregate rate would actually also would drop from 1.5381 to 1.5284. I know that was a lot of numbers, and so I'll kind of open the floor to council, but that's kind of really where the levy sits in front of you tonight.
Thank you. Councilmember Kelly?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Believe it or not, Director Craddy, I believe that I followed you. However, I hit us or hit me with that $2 million. Again, I didn't understand what that was for or what.
So the $2 million that the council has authorized us to issue for roads. So there's $2 million on our tax levy that is for road improvements that is, in essence, tied to our existing debt. And so that's really that $2 million amount that we have levied for multiple years, close to 10 years at this point. And we've just always maintained it at that $2 million number. We've not raised it based off of any inflationary factors or overall growth. We've maintained it at the $2 million.
But that is included in the rate.
It is included in the rate, correct?
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I thought it would be, but I mean, I guess we have other carve-outs as well in what we collect. So, but thank you. That makes it clear to me. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
You're welcome. Mr. Manager, did you have a clarification?
Well, I think just some history on that. When back in 2015, we were really looking at how we can put more money towards roads. And one of the points was with bonds, we usually have an alternate revenue source that we're paying for our bonds with. So sales taxes or other taxes, sewer rates, stormwater utility fee, whatever we've pledged for the bonds. And in this instance, the policy decision was made in 2015 to say, let's not use those revenues, but move that money into our road fund and then levy property taxes to cover the cost. Because every bond that we issue has a property tax backstop to it that we can levy property taxes for. So that's where the history of that came from.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilmember Allen?
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you, Director Craddy, for breaking this down. I know that this can be confusing when constituents are doing their best to keep up and they see that our tax rate the last several years has actually gone down, but when they see that the equalized assessed value has gone up, and then when they receive their property tax bills, they're like, why are my property taxes a little higher? So can you maybe explain a little bit more about why, if we do approach it this way, their property tax bill may go up, and also all the other public taxing bodies will be having these same conversations when it comes to their equalized assessed values as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Really, I think, when we look at assessed value growth, that can be from a number of factors. That can be from new businesses or new homes being built in Peoria. It's also based off, and I think why people can see at times an increase in their taxes, but it also may not equate to the number that we're talking on paper, is because it's really subject to the overall valuation of your home. And so if your home gets revalued, you're going to see an increase. And so it's always like those things, and it's always difficult to necessarily sit there and pinpoint this is what it's going to mean for an individual household, because it's really based off of how the homes are assessed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I'm very empathetic to everyone's household budget. And if constituents are following along in page 50 of our budget book, it does a good job of giving us a historical context from 2021 to 2026 of what the equalized assessed value percentages have been, and then the tax rates. And so you can see the fluctuation there. And then you also reference in the narrative, though, that it looks like towards 2027, you see possibly this returning, that we won't have this increased assessed values?
I think everyone continues to be a little surprised that the housing market continues to go up at the values that it has. long-term, usually the housing market, we're seeing more in the neighborhood of following the rate of inflation. And so as the inflation continues to moderate, while it never fully goes back to what it was before, my anticipation as inflation tends to moderate, that we should start to see some of these value growths also start to get a little bit smaller.
Thank you, Director Craddy. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
You're welcome. Thanks for that explanation. Councilmember Seer.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Director Craddy, thank you for being here tonight. I'm sure it's going to be a long 4, 5, or 6 weeks. I just want to make sure I understand about this. First of all, EAV. What is the last 12 months? What's been the CPI level?
So the estimate is around 2.9% for the last 12 months.
Okay, so explain to me how would our property values go up 6.6% when the CPI, it's at 2.9%? There's any correlation between the two?
So there can at times be a direct correlation. And I will admit I'm obviously not someone that does an assessment process for a living, so I'm doing it based off of my, my best understanding of the process. What this really comes down to is that the values of properties when they're being purchased is higher than the rate of inflation. And so when these properties are being reassessed, which is very common when you buy a home, that the property will be reassessed based off of your purchase price. We're seeing purchase prices of homes growing at a faster rate than of inflation. I hope that kind of makes sense.
Well, yes, I mean, I understand all about supply and demand. Tell us a little bit about our tax bill that we all receive, and we have to pay twice a year. So if this $2 million is part of the tax bill, like you're saying, is this a taxable event or deduction for our constituent then?
It is.
So that $2 million, because it's part of the tax bill, real estate tax bill, it's deductible.
Correct. And whatever their entire tax bill up, I think it's to $40,000 now with the new SALT deduction. So as long as they don't have a tax bill over $40,000, it's tax deductible.
Okay. I think that's all I have. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
You're welcome. Councilmember Kelly.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. There is one thing to remember about what we see as our EAV. Our EAV is a lagging number. And as inflation goes up, if we just follow inflation, if we exactly meet the inflation rate, our EAV will not be rising that quickly. Let's assume no new buildings, everything stays the same from year to year. We recently had a pretty high rate of inflation. And this year, it has come down significantly. These numbers do not reflect that one bit. We're going to see that in subsequent years. We don't see it right now. I think it's perhaps worthwhile to note that over the last 10 years, 15 years, the EAV in Peoria, Illinois has not kept up with inflation. We've actually lost ground in our EAV, which is that's very worrying. Everything looks really great right now because, our EAV, is going up, but we are a little bit behind the 8 ball as far as at least keeping up with the rate of inflation, much less with some real growth in the city. So, thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilmember Riggenbach.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I would move for approval of item 25-277.
Can I get a second? Seconded by Councilmember Kelly. Any other questions, comments? Councilmember Seer?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I knew I had one more question. I couldn't remember it, and it just came back to me. The $2 million, is it included in your report about how much bonds your department wants to issue this year? Because I see two numbers. One is 10.6 and one's 8.7 or 8.9.
So no, well, it is included in terms of what the overall amount required to pay our previously issued bonds. So what we are using is our taxing ability on existing bonds. It's not tied to the bond issuance that we're doing, that is planned for this year in this budget.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
You're welcome. Councilmember Vespa?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So, I'm not an economist by trade, but wouldn't EAV be kind of a leading indicator because, the Fed releases money to the banks, and then the banks typically loan first via mortgage to, home buyers. And then home buyers, of course, pay, buy the house, pay the mortgage back to the banks. But that money then kind of, trickles down to the consumer goods, which then make up the consumer price index. So I kind of think that it's more of a leading indicator if the EAV is going up. And I also expect a lot of rate cuts, as I think most economists do, in the next year. And that's going to make it cheaper and easier for people to borrow money. It makes money cheaper. So I think, I don't know, I just foresee the housing market full steam ahead, but maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, I think home sales, home starts, which we'll get into a little bit with the presentation when we look at kind of real estate transfer taxes, is a leading indicator of more than likely how the county and the assessor's office is going to view the assessment process. So it is kind of like, because of how taxes are done in Illinois, the EAV is a lagging indicator of the previous year's growth, where kind of the housing starts and housing market. So it's kind of one and the same. So I see really there's both sides of that piece of that argument. But I agree, I look at housing starts and home sales as a pretty good indicator of the health of the economy.
Okay, that response makes sense. I appreciate it. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Is the EAV a leading or lagging indicator? Let's ask ChatGPT. We have a motion on the floor. Okay, Councilmember Seer?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Sorry about just a couple more questions. One is really, I'm not sure it has anything to do with the budget, but it's for our manager, city manager. Patrick, do you think one day, okay, we're talking about EAV tonight, everybody should know that we penalize our taxpayers when they renovate their house. We tell them to get a permit from the city, tell us what they're doing, and then eventually, because there's always a 3-year lag, correct, in the asset value of our house. I mean, like I said, this is not a great setting for a conversation about that, but what's your forecast? And do you ever see a time where we won't penalize our taxpayers?
The state does provide for an exemption for improvements that you make in your house. I think it's about $6,000 that can be added on as an exemption when you're making improvements. So it's a small number, but it is a number nonetheless that will mitigate some of that impact of the improvements that you make to your home. I think that's certainly a policy question to engage our legislative delegation in, and talking to them about what kind of incentives can you create to encourage the reinvestment in properties, and looking at not penalizing property owners for the investments that they make in their homes.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
You're welcome. Okay, please cast your ballots. Motion passes unanimously. Madam Clerk?
25-278 is a communication from the City Manager and Finance Director Comptroller with a request to hold a discussion on the 2026-2027 biennial budget.
Mr. Manager?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Tonight obviously kicks off the discussions that we'll hold here over the next several weeks pertaining to the budget. And we have, as we normally do, have put together a presentation. And I'm going to turn the floor over to our Finance Director, Kyle Craddy, to walk through the presentation. And then we'll be able to answer questions that council hopefully has.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. Just as the manager said, we're here to talk about the 2026-2027 biennial budget. I think just a kind of reminder for the council is we undertake every 2 years a biennial budget. So we really look at that impact, financially speaking, of the budget for the next 2 years. Obviously, also in your book, I've provided kind of a 5-year review of what the impact of this budget is long-term. But just, I think, for legal standpoint, really the budget that you end up approving is for next year. And then we will bring you back a revised budget next year based off of how things are going and everything and so forth. I think anytime you start talking about budget, it's always important to go back and remind ourselves that the strategic plan that the council has laid out is really the intended document to drive the decision-making that the staff is making and the recommendations that we're making to you in terms of our budget requests. Because that really is the bedrock of what we are trying to do here, and it's the direction that council has given the staff in terms of proceeding, in terms of service delivery. And so I'm going to spend a few slides here kind of going over how we as staff are handling the strategic plan, how we are addressing that, and the challenges the council has put out as part of the strategic plan, and really some of that budget alignment. There is a section in your budget that specifically looks at all of the different goals for the departments this year, and I'll get into here in a slide or so how that really ties back to some organizational-wide goals that the staff worked through this over the last year. The first thing I'll just kind of, go over with this is, really just kind of that reminder of our vision and mission. So Peoria's mission is to provide excellent services, protection, and infrastructure that fosters a high quality of life, as well as having a mission that Peoria is a thriving all-American city rich in history and natural beauty with an abundance of opportunities for everyone. And really the pillars of all of this are those strategic priorities. And so for those strategic priorities, as a reminder, we have quality of life, infrastructure, downtown development, community safety, business growth and prosperity, and embrace diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so as I kind of get into the work the staff did, I just really want to take the time to thank the staff for their efforts in going through this. I know this was a little bit of a different process than we have gone through in the past, and really trying to look at this as an organization in terms of what our goals need to be and how we want to address these. I also just want to give a little bit of a shout out to the Assistant City Manager, Kimberly Richardson, because she's really the one that wrangled all of us and led us down this path. And so I just want to make sure that she's acknowledged for the work that she put into this with the staff to get to where we are with these. And so as I kind of said, we went through a process of asking the departments to have goals that align with their budget. And so when you look through their budget and you look through those goals, there's a direct alignment to the spending requests that you have in front of you. The challenge we really went through this year, though, is if you remember from the strategic plan, we had a section on each of these strategic priorities that said, what are our challenges? What are the challenges we face to actually meet our performance metrics and what we want to get to? And so those were the bedrock of what staff used to review to come up with what we've now done, which is an organizational goal per strategic priority that all staff are working towards, all departments are working towards to try to meet that stopgap goal or that organizational-wide goal that will help us complete the overall strategic priority of the council. I know that was probably a little bit in the weeds, but we went through a relatively expensive process to get there. I just want to have this slide up here in terms of the department goals, and you'll see that we have pretty much equal alignment in the different strategic priorities. The one I will call out, and why there is an asterisk next to that 0, because I don't want the takeaway from this to be this, that the staff is not focusing on downtown development. Downtown development is intertwined in a lot of the other goals in terms of quality of life, infrastructure, business growth, and prosperity that will address a lot of the things that we're doing downtown, but it may not necessarily be just downtown specific. And so as you look at the goals, I think you will see that there is some of that alignment, but I didn't want the takeaway to be that we're not focusing on downtown. We are absolutely focusing on downtown and how we make it a destination for people to come down here. And so from a direct alignment standpoint, this is how we had to show it, but I just don't want that message to be out there that we're not looking at it from that standpoint. I want to touch a little bit on the organizational-wide goals that the staff have completed that help kind of address some of those challenges. And so we kind of took on one per area so that we can start taking bite-sized chunks out of the strategic plan. And so for quality of life, the goal we have is by Q4 of 2026, we will develop a service modernization strategy that evaluates the city's use of technology to meet the community's service delivery expectations and adheres to the city's fund balance policy. And so what we're really trying to do here is we understand more and more people expect technology. They expect service delivery to be done effectively. But we also have to do that within the means that we have. And so staff over the next year will be kind of looking at how we do service delivery and try to modernize it with the technology options we have so that we can try to keep costs as low as we possibly can. In terms of infrastructure, we have complete 90% of the fiscal year 26 implementation-ready capital, as well as routine maintenance projects within 5% budget variance by the end of the year. So we're really putting a number and saying the capital plan that you have in front of you, that the goal is to have 90% of that completed by year end. And that's something we'll continue to track and report back to council on as we work through it. In terms of downtown development, implement a comprehensive placemaking initiative for the central business district to make it a destination that increases foot traffic by 10% by December 2026. So really the impetus behind this is we want to get more people downtown. We want to make it a place that they want to come to. And we're going to measure that by looking at how many more people are downtown over the coming year. In terms of community safety, I will say this is one that we wrestled with pretty heavily because I feel like a lot of times we sit up here and we talk about those emergency interventions or calls, right? And while that's a number, really what we focused on is how can we implement interdepartmental prevention strategies as well as operational strategies and increasing awareness of the public so that we can see actually a decrease in our emergency interventions. We would rather deal with an issue before it becomes an emergency intervention. And the fire department has been doing this for a while, and we're kind of taking that model and wanting to expand it out into the rest of the organization. In terms of business growth and prosperity, we will identify, streamline, and increase ease of use for business-related activities so we can reduce average turnaround times by 5% by the end of 2027. Your question might be, why not by the end of 2026? And I will be honest with you and say that is because I don't have a metric to tell the exact turnaround time. So we need 2026 to measure how long it's taking us to go through the process as we work through this, and then use 27 as our improvement measurement. So we will start these in earnest in 26, and we've been doing some things in 25 to try to address this already. But that's why that one is more of a 27, because we don't have a benchmark right now to measure ourselves against. And in terms of embrace diversity, equity, and inclusion, but by December 2026, we will implement a comprehensive public engagement framework to support increasing public awareness of city services and activities as measured by program-specific outcomes and increasing participation in city meetings, events, and online platforms by 25% within 18 months of implementation. So we're really trying to make sure that we're reaching everyone and we're getting them engaged with what the city is doing and making sure that they're aware of what's out there. And so, that's really what, the staff used for the creation of their goals that you see in kind of the front pages of the budget book. as well as the financial requests that you have in front of you. So I just want to go through that because, I think for me, it's always looking at our strategic plan really drives our spending decisions. It really drives how we're moving forward. And so I always kind of wanted to start this conversation not just by jumping into the dollars and cents, but looking really at the work we've been doing on the strategic plan.
Yes, Director Craddy, I just wanted to comment on the goals before you move on. Of course, seeing that 0 at downtown development was a disappointment to see 0 at downtown development, knowing that we are working aggressively to improve downtown development as one of our 6 strategic priorities. So I have a thought on how we might address that rather than putting a 0, that we could potentially list downtown development as a duplicated goal. If we have, several projects related to infrastructure, several projects related to public safety, quality of life, business growth, that 0 turns into an 8 or a 10 with an asterisk, showing where the duplication is rather than a 0.
Yeah, and I'm more than happy to kind of do that exercise and bring it back as a report back next week, just so, we have it on the record of where that alignment is, and we could talk about it next week.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Any other questions before I move into that, any other questions on the strategic planning component of this discussion?
Councilmember Kelly?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I don't know if this will change anything or not, but to me, a goal for downtown development of having more foot traffic is kind of a downstream item, seems to me. I like coming to festivals downtown. I like, but to me, if we want to measure downtown development, we should be looking at downtown employment, revitalizing our business climate. You can get more foot traffic with festivals or something, but in the meantime, the buildings are empty and they're falling down. And that's a little exaggeration, or a big exaggeration. But anyway, it seems like to me, a better measure would be downtown employment. That leads to everything else. I had another note here, but I don't know what it means. So, thank you. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Did you have a comment, Assistant City Manager Richardson?
I do, and I want to thank our Finance Director, Mr. Crowdy, for his presentation. But I do want to bring this up to the council. We're going to come back to you all with an update on our strategic plan as a comprehensive of where we've been and where we're going. And I want to be clear, organizational-wide goal is not the same as the activity and the tactic. And so what you're seeing are SMART goals that we wanted to tie to the actual budget. And because of the exercise that we've done a lot of activities in the downtown. And so you're going to see that reflected in our report back and on the website when we launch it. So to your point, Mayor, you will see activity in the downtown. It's just that they weren't tied to a SMART goal for 2026 budget, but it is tied to the strategic plan. And I just want to make sure that that alignment is understood, that this is being represented as these are the budget tied back to the items that we're going to be talking about as you all deliberate over the 2026-2027 budget. But as it comes to the whole strategic plan, there's a lot of activity. But because they're not tied dollar to dollar to the budget, you don't see that reflected today. But you will get that report back when we come to you all at the end of the budget period when we present the strategic plan report.
Okay, but aren't there budget activities or goals that are tied to downtown specifically?
Yes, and those goals are already existing. And so because we really haven't fully completed those goals, they're still ongoing. And so we've already come to the council, we've already adopted those goals, and so they're not new goals that the council will need to readopt.
Okay, it's because they're not completed.
Correct.
They're in progress.
Yes, ma'am.
Understood.
Yes,
Thank you.
thank you.
Councilmember Gordon Young?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just have two items. One's a question, one's a comment. Director Crowdy, I also had a question that I wrote down regarding the foot traffic. Not necessarily concerned about the business specific, but wanting to know, I want to know, like, how do you plan to measure the additional or increased foot traffic?
So I would say, so that is actually currently being measured through economic development. We use different tools to measure that. Right now, we have a program that we've been using for 2 years now that allow us at point in time to see where people are coming to, where people are going. And it's really based off of data from your cell phone. As people carry around those devices, they also track where those individuals are coming to and from and how long they're staying in locations. And so as we continue to refine the designated areas that we monitor for foot traffic, where we want to see ongoing activity, this is how we are able to partner with our community organizations as they identify locations for their activities, because we know that's where the foot traffic is taking us. So you're going to be seeing coming up some other activities that are happening that are not funded through the city, but through our partnerships, and using that data has been very helpful.
Thank you. I actually sat in on a session at the Illinois Municipal League, and they talked about how that's a valuable tool in terms of understanding where people are going and where to continue to build or where we need to build. So thank you for that information. The other is a comment. I wrote a lot of stars next to this one, and it was the, let me just say it specifically, embrace diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I like how it is to increase participation. Often people are saying they didn't know about an event, or they don't have access, for whatever reason, they don't have the technology. So I am very, very pleased to see that there's this inclusion process. Not that it wasn't there, but there is definitely an opportunity to increase that. Well done. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
You're welcome. Councilmember Kelly?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I finally figured out what I couldn't figure out before. On the business growth and prosperity item, I'm sorry, but I don't really understand what that is. Identify, streamline, and increase ease of use. Use of what?
It's really about ease of use with our processes. So coming in, getting a license.
All processes?
Yeah, getting a permit, getting a license, getting any of those things that a business owner needs to be able to operate their business in Peoria. We're looking to streamline that process to make it easier for them to get that process done.
Thank you. And that perhaps answers my second question about average turnaround times.
Yeah.
That's inside City Hall, or inside the
Correct.
Scope of City Hall.
Correct.
As people. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
You're welcome. Carry on, Director Crady.
Okay, we'll move on to all the dollars and cents that go into the budget now. Kind of want to start off with a little bit of discussion, a little bit on the national economics. For those that do follow, real GDP increased 3.8% in quarter 2 25. But we also had a decrease of 0.6% in Q1 25. And so really we're averaging closer to that 3% real GDP during the year so far. We'll have to see where third quarter lands. Really that increase this last quarter was driven by consumer spending, as well as a decrease in imports, just because of how the formula works for GDP. As imports drop, we actually will see an increase in GDP. And so that's really what that quarter 2 25 increase was related to. As Councilman Vespa also pointed out, the Federal Reserve continues to cut rates towards their kind of goal of around 2.75%. But there was a signal a little bit, and I believe in the last Fed minutes that they may be looking at a slower cut process now than they had originally anticipated. We've already seen fewer cuts than most people anticipated this year, because most people are believing there will not be another rate cut in 2025. And that could be signaling a little bit from the Fed, I think, from their minutes. A little bit of concern over long-term inflation, and a little bit of a concern on really some of the employment numbers that they've had over the last few months is where some of their concern is, and just wanting to make sure that they get more data before they make additional rate cuts. The inflation trending is lower, however, and is projected to be between 2.3 and 3.2 by 2026. There's a lot of factors that go into that, and we'll have to see where that kind of lies at the end of the year. I think really from an economic standpoint and looking at the city's budget overall, we have to look at these macro signals to kind of give us an indication of where we think the budget's going to go. And I can say, you ask 100 economists right now, you're probably going to get a 50-50 split on what they think the market's going to do in terms of either tariffs are going to have some cooling effects or we're going to push through it. And so there isn't really a clear indication at this point of the direction of the economy. And so from the budget standpoint for this coming year, we really have put forward a budget that builds off of some of the revenue growth that we've had this year, but keeps it in moderation because a little bit of that uncertainty. As we've talked about leading indicators, right? We have some leading indicators that are telling us to have some caution in terms of jobs numbers. There was a weaker consumer sentiment number that came out yesterday, I believe. It's too early in the process to know that for sure. I just wanted to have that as kind of like an over 1,000 or 30,000 foot view of our thought process with this budget is we don't have an indication of weakness yet, but we also want to keep it relatively moderate because there is that 50-50 possibility of some concerns on the economy long term. In terms of unemployment, the national unemployment is at 4.2%. The state unemployment is at 4.8%. And the Peoria unemployment, which traditionally is a little bit higher than the state and the national, is at 5.5%. It is down from 6.1% a year ago. Just to the point that I was discussing, though, I will point to the end of that chart. You will see that both the national, the state, as well as Peoria's unemployment rate are starting to go point in the upward direction. Once again, is that an indication of further weakness? Was it a few months? We'll have to have more data as time goes on, but we are seeing a little bit of an uptick in the unemployment rate nationally as well as the state and locally. In terms of the 2026-2027 budget summary, from a revenue standpoint, we have revenues at $298 million for 2026. That's down 1.4%. What is really keeping us seeing strong revenue growth is really our local taxes. So our local home rule taxes, our HRA taxes, all those locally generated taxes. Because we have some lagging state revenues. It's not something that you haven't heard from me before. PPRT has been a weakness for us. And the state income tax is not growing necessarily, or the state sales tax is not necessarily growing at the same rate as the home rule sales tax. Some of that is related to the decline in use tax that we've seen with some of the tax law changes in the state of Illinois. So that's a little bit lagging as well. Income taxes continue to be strong, but we also have a lower amount of known state grants next year compared to this previous year. So really it's the local sources that are keeping us in terms of looking at a relatively positive revenue growth. In terms of operations, the overall operational expenditures for next year is $216.6 million. That does not take into account capital as well as debt, so we'll have that in a future slide. And that's up 7.7%. And that's heavily driven by higher benefit costs and pension costs. Obviously, we've sat around the horseshoe multiple years. We've talked about public safety pensions. We'll talk about it again here in a few slides. But that's still a growing cost that we have. It's going up. The actuarial request is currently sitting at an additional $1.4 million for next year. We're actually recommending to make a contribution higher than that, and I'll get into that later in the presentation. But that is a component. The other component is we are having a very, very difficult year with health insurance this year. We are in a situation, I guess, just kind of high-level overview of this. We are self-insured, so we go out, we buy stop-loss premiums to cover ourselves over $225,000 on any individual loss. Our overall use is up, as well as our large claimants who are either at half stop-loss or full stop-loss has gone up. We're currently on a trajectory to have claims that exceed $4 million more than they were last year. Luckily, about $2 million of that is being covered through our stop-loss carrier because these are individuals who've broken through that ceiling of stop-loss. But what that ultimately means is we need to make additional contributions to our healthcare fund, which is a separate fund outside of our general fund, to make sure that we have enough resources to frankly cover the shortfall that we have this year, plus what we anticipate will still be probably a relatively difficult year next year in terms of the health industry. Health insurance and health costs are not getting cheaper, and I do not anticipate them getting cheaper anytime in the near future. And so we are just having to make a larger contribution to that in this year's budget, so that's really one of the large cost growth. I want to say it's in the neighborhood of about a $3.5 million additional transfer this year from the general fund to make up the funding gap that we have for health insurance. In terms of capital, we have it at $48.9 million. That's down 36.7%. The one caveat I will put with that is there are a number of things that we have moved out of capital into operational items. Things like ongoing CSO monitoring, things that really don't meet the criteria for being a capital expenditure. They now show up in contractual expenses instead of being capital. I think you loop those back in, we're probably closer to the $55 million number, but just kind of wanted to have that context. But we are down from last year. It includes the engineering work for CSO year 5. Unfortunately, we are in an environment that we have less anticipated capital grant funds at both the state and federal level. But we also do continue to have our road and drainage projects within the CIP. In terms of debt, we have debt payments next year of $21.5 million. That's down 2.1%. And that is inclusive of the debt payment if council approves issuing additional debt for the capital projects that we have in place. We still would see a 2.1% reduction even with that additional debt issuance this coming year.
Just a quick question.
Yeah.
Director Craddy, you said you moved some of the capital costs to another area, maybe about $6 million or so.
Correct.
Where did you move that?
So it's still within the individual funds that they were. So if it was sewer related, it's still sitting in the sewer fund. If it was stormwater related, it still is in stormwater. It's just instead of being classified as a capital expenditure, it's now listed as a contractual expense. And when I get into kind of the presentation component, when we look at some of that high level, you're going to see the contractual expense number is up what would probably seem like an amount larger than it should be.
Okay.
That's the reason, is
Okay.
because we move those around. Because at the end of the day, from an accounting standpoint, I can't capitalize those on our financials. And so those really don't meet our requirements under our fixed asset policy to be considered capital. So we need to move them to operations.
Okay, thank you.
Looking at the 2025 highlights, and I will say I think that we have a number of highlights in terms of where we are anticipating ending 2025. Currently, from an overall standpoint, and this includes all of our funds, revenues are ahead of budget by $16.9 million, or 5.9%. I once again will point to our stronger local sources, as well as some of our smaller sources. We continue to have strong interest income growth, fines and forfeitures, as well as HRA taxes. All of those areas are still performing really strong and helping us with that overall number. Once again, that is the overall amount. Just so I know we talk a lot of times in terms of the general fund. The general fund, we are anticipating revenues being up $7.7 million compared to the 25 adopted budget. That is heavily driven by those local sources. During the last budget session, the state opened up the ability for us to receive directly sales taxes on out-of-state purchases, as well as sales taxes on certain tangible leased goods. Things like medical equipment, those type of things. That has increased our anticipated sales tax close to $5 million. Some of that is also we've had very, very strong car sales this year as well. We'll see how that kind of changes if it changes with kind of the tariff discussion. But we've seen really strong revenue growth in that area. And so that's really what's driving that general fund revenue growth. Expenses are on track to be above budget due to capital timing. You know, when we put out a capital budget, sometimes those are multi-year projects. It's not always easy to say this is exactly when we're going to spend those funds. And so, you know, we always track them. We maintain them as obligations. And so we just have more capital projects being completed, which is a good thing, which means we spent more than we anticipated. In terms of the general fund, our expenses are anticipated to be up $1.6 million. That is primarily due to the fact that personal property replacement tax, unfortunately, was weaker than we had anticipated during the budget last year. We had anticipated having around $11 million in revenue, and we're going to probably get close to $9.4 million. Because we use that revenue source to fund our pensions, our pension obligations, we have to make those payments. And so we're going to have to transfer an additional $1.6 million to our police and fire pension fund to be able to make our entire contribution. And that's going to come out of the general fund because that's just really our source to be able to do that. So that's why our anticipated expenditures are up compared to where they were. It's not because of overspending on contractual or people. It really comes down to that public safety pension component that we need to make sure we make those payments. In terms of use of fund balance, we had anticipated using $13.1 million in fund balance across all of our funds last year. The estimate that I have is we'll use a little over $9 million. So that really means we're retaining about an additional $4 million in fund balance across all of our funds to be able to use for future needs. In terms of what it is in the general fund, we had budgeted last year to have about a $2.1 million loss or use of fund balance last year. We are looking at having close to a $3.9 million surplus this year. So that has really a net impact of $6 million on the general fund. And so we had anticipated ending this coming fiscal year around $49 million in overall fund balance. We're going to be closer to that $56 million number, which as we get into the presentation really just means that we more than likely have an additional year before we'll get to that fund balance threshold that we're of 25% that we'll have to have some more difficult conversations. But overall, 25's picture is looking strong, and we're happy with where kind of 25 is going to land. Just a few of the highlights of kind of where we're seeing that. So kind of going back to our initial conversation, real estate transfer taxes are up 15.2%. So what that means is that there's a number of homes and properties in the city that are selling. And so we're getting a larger component of those taxes. Home rule sales tax, as I said, is up 14.9% is where we're estimating it to be, really driven by some of those tax changes at the state level. Hotel tax is up almost 5%. That's heavily driven by the activity at both the Civic Center as well as out by the Louisville Slugger Complex. We're seeing a lot of hotel room nights, which is helping the bottom line and is also helping the contribution we're making to the Civic Center. Restaurant tax is up about 1.5%. Not as strong as hotel, but what it means is people are still going out to eat and are still spending money in the restaurants in town. Sewer and stormwater is up 5%. One of the things that is always hard to kind of quantify as we get into the budget process is what are we going to potentially collect on unpaid bills? And I will say that we have, the staff is both the finance department and legal department, as well as community development, have done a really good job this year looking at how we can be more aggressive with our collection process. And so we actually have revenues about 5% higher than what we had budgeted because we're collecting on past due amounts. Licenses and permits is down about 3.2%. This is really tied to things like utility permits. So someone does a tap-on fee, someone does something like that in this arena. That's really the driver. I will admit that this is one of those revenues that jumps around hundreds of thousands of dollars every year, really depending on development, what's going on, different projects. So that's really where we're seeing that decrease. I think for context, when we're talking about some of these large numbers, what that really means is $250,000. It's not millions of dollars. We're just lagging about $250,000 on that revenue area. State sales tax is up 8.9%. As I said, it's lagging a little bit behind home rule sales tax because of that change in use tax, but it's still strong. Income taxes are up 2.6%, so that's based off of our share we get of overall income taxes collected by the state of Illinois, distributed on a per capita basis. And then lastly, we're anticipating corporate income, or as we call it, personal property replacement tax, to be down 14.3% this year. And it's just one of those areas that has been difficult over the last few years as the state has tried to recapture overpayments that were made in both 22 and 23. The good news is we anticipate that this fiscal year from the state is the last year of that recapture. We anticipate it. We will not always know until the final, kind of where we're at with that, but we are anticipating some growth in that revenue source next year. So that was 2025. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about 2025 compared to 2026. We have real estate transfer tax down 6%. That is really heavily driven by these numbers, some of the largest numbers that we've seen in terms of the revenue we receive from real estate transfer tax. And so continuing to budget at that level didn't seem prudent when this can really change on whims that we can't control. So we just want to be a little bit more conservative on this number and be a little bit closer to our average the last 4 years. And that's really where that 6% decrease came in. Home rule sales tax, this kind of getting back to the discussion a little bit earlier, we have some minimal growth, but not substantial growth, so we have that up 0.3%. Hotel tax, we have down 5%. This is a little bit of a difficult one for us to really decide to really work through this year. Why we have a recommendation of it being down 5% is with the closure of the Civic Center, we anticipate that there will be some reduction of hotel room nights downtown for at least the period of time that the venue is closed. And so we felt it was reasonable based off that time period of the year to put in a 5% reduction in overall room nights. If we don't, great, but we just want to be prudent and be prepared that that could happen. We're still anticipating, that 1.5% growth in restaurant taxes. So, we're still in line with that. Stormwater is down and sewer is down 5.2%. Once again, that really goes back to I can't budget necessarily for collections I don't know are coming. So this really reverts us back to what is going to be our billed amount we're going to collect on for 2026. So that number will probably end up higher, but what that number will be exactly, I can't necessarily say at this point. Licenses and permits were up 1.3%, just kind of normal cost growth as we see some development. State sales taxes is down 0.2%. That's really kind of that final wind down of really some of that use tax is anticipated to be down again next year with some of those changes. So really that's where that number is. Income tax is anticipated to be about 0.4%. And then personal property replacement tax, and these are numbers based off of the current estimates from IML, looking at about a 10.6% increase. And that really isn't driven by growth per se in corporate income taxes. It's more driven by not having the recapture of the previous overpayments is really what that's tied to. And so that is anticipated in the budget to have about a 10.6% increase. The only other area I wanted to kind of just bring up to council, because I know it's a question that comes up every year, it's actually in the budget document, but this is the first time that we can really discuss in terms of how much sales tax we're getting from our cannabis dispensaries, because we hit the threshold to be able to have enough to disclose the overall revenue. And we are budgeting based off of how we have been performing, that we will get about $1 million in cannabis revenue next year from sales of cannabis. So that shows up as its own individual line now, and we'll report it as such going forward. If at any point we lose a dispensary and we drop down to 4 again, I will not be able to do it anymore. But the confidentiality requirements of our data sharing with the state requires there to be 4 operators before I can disclose that publicly. So just wanted to have that out there. I know it's a question that comes up most years during the budget. That is the amount that we're getting directly for sales of cannabis. This is a really hard thing to read, and I apologize for that, so I will just get to the few areas that I've highlighted. You know, the key areas, obviously, your property tax. We have that in it based off the current levy estimate with around a 6.2% overall increase for next year. The other larger number is the insurance charges. So this is going to be things like transfers, contributions from employees, stop-loss reimbursement payments. We have almost up 10% year over year. And that really is going, again, back to that healthcare trend we're seeing, our known factors, and really where the market is that we're going to have. It's counted as revenue because the healthcare fund is a separate fund from the general fund, so it receives revenue from other funds, but that's why that number is up 9.3% is really where we're seeing the cost curve on health insurance. From an overall standpoint, from local sources, we have revenues up 1.7%, or a little bit over $3 million for 2026. You know, just a couple highlights, and we went over it, so I'll go over it quickly. We have the assessed value growth of about 6.56% with a slightly lower rate than the rate that we have this year. I think the other big piece that, you know, staff is coming to the council to recommend this year is council will probably remember that we have not taken the CPI increase for stormwater fees since 2021. 2021 was the last year that we did take the CPI increase that's already in the ordinance that's supposed to happen every year. Because of where we are from a fund balance standpoint, we are around 20% fund balance in the stormwater fund, as well as current future obligations and needs for maintenance needs. We're recommending to council to take the CPI increase for next year. That would be around 2.9%. What I kind of want to just kind of go over with council real quick is, what in essence did we not charge the community over the last 4 years when we didn't take the CPI increase? So CPI during that time period is around 19.2%. For the average homeowner, the average stormwater bill is somewhere between $45 to $50 a quarter. All of that to say, if we had taken all of those increases, the homeowners over that 4-year period would have paid between $100 to $115 more in totality than they have today. So obviously, our decision to do that did save the taxpayers money. But from a staff perspective, we are sitting here saying, for the health of the stormwater utility fund and the things we have coming forward, we need to do the CPI increase for next year. If that is the direction council would go, I would just remind council there wouldn't be an item in front of you to approve because it's already in the ordinance. For the council that have been around for the last few years, we've brought the ordinance to amend it when we did not do the CPI increase. This is already in the ordinance. And so obviously we'd be looking for some council direction to make sure that that council is comfortable with taking that CPI increase as we work through this process. I just didn't want it to kind of, the belief that we would bring an ordinance to do the increase because it's already mandated by the ordinance. So long-winded way of saying that staff is recommending to take that increase for next year. In terms of 2026 state, federal, and other sources, kind of going back to that conversation again, we're anticipating having total state sources down about 5.8% year over year. Really, again, heavily driven by a little decrease in state sales tax, but really it's that unknown grant environment. And, I think that's something we're seeing across the board, whether it's state or federal, is that if we don't have grant paperwork in our hands already, the environment's just not as ripe as it's been the last few years for grant funding. And so we just have a reduction. We don't put on paper things that we don't know for sure at the time we're doing the budget. So that's really where you're seeing some of that reduction is really on those areas. Federal is up a little bit, but that really is heavily driven by these were grants that had already been awarded, especially in the infrastructure space, that are in progress, and we just anticipate those getting done. So that's kind of the overall revenues by those individual types. In terms of expenses by category, the couple areas I wanted to touch on here is, overall operating expenditures are up 7.7%. I want to kind of talk about really the top three areas. So the personnel, the employee benefits, and the contractual services. So from a personnel services standpoint, we have an increase of 5.29%. While, yes, we have union agreements, other agreements that mandate what our salary increases are, and that's probably more in the neighborhood of a 3 to 3.25%. When we do the budget, we have to budget as if we have full employment, that we're fully staffed the entire time. That's not necessarily how the year works out because people come and go. So really that increase of 5.29% is really more driven by that assumption of full staffing. And so it's not adding a ton of positions, it's not adding a bunch of positions, it's not giving staff larger increases, it's really driven by that component. Employee benefits we talked about, it's really health insurance driven, as well as driven by the increase in our pension contributions. And then lastly, the contractual services, going back to the comments earlier, we have a natural increase in some of our contractual services, but a little over $6 million of that increase is related to that transition from a capital expense to a contractual expense. So you have to look at the capital decrease in consideration with that increase in contractual to know that they really kind of net out of each other. And so I just know those numbers can pop off as large increases when we're in kind of a revenue standpoint that's not a large growth. But that's really where some of those numbers lie. Really overall, from a net expenditure standpoint, we're anticipating to be down about 3.6% year over year from an expense standpoint. In terms of staffing, back in 2025, if you remember, we had 14 additions to staffing. That was heavily driven in our stormwater utility area. That put our current full-time staffing at 706. The budget in front of the council is requesting 2 additional positions, as well as the redevelopment of an existing position that council has approved before. So really, it's not a headcount change. However, it's a position change and a salary change. So we'll discuss that with council. But really, we're looking at adding 2 individuals, bringing staffing to 708, which is up 0.2% year over year. The 3 positions that are requested as part of this budget, Public Works is looking to convert. Last year, the council approved a stormwater manager position that was really looking at managing our stormwater management process and operations process. The Public Works Director is requesting to rework that position to make it an Enterprise Operations Deputy Director. So on top of overseeing stormwater, they also would oversee sewer as well as garbage. So it would be an expansion of the position. The position would be split from a funding standpoint, 1/3, 1/3, and 1/3 between the individual funds, and that's how it's presented in the budget. So while not a headcount change, it is a position rework. So that is why we have it listed here. In terms of ECC, the Director Blaney is looking to create a position for training and quality assurance supervisor. So this is a position that currently their supervisors do a lot of the training, they do a lot of the oversight, but because of really, unfortunately, always being slightly understaffed because of turnover, a lot of those supervisors end up in the seat doing the work. And so Brandon is looking to have a position that can do a lot of that onboarding, ongoing training, as well as quality control on the calls that they have to do retraining if necessary, and really keep us in line with the national standards when it comes to our kind of emergency communication center. And then lastly, as we talked about a little bit earlier on collections, the Treasurer Montalongo is requesting an additional position funded out of stormwater for them to also be a part of the collection process, looking specifically at stormwater. When we look at some of our uncollected amounts, really stormwater is an area that we have some of the most difficulty in, and obviously we have other tools, but this is looking at having a dedicated resource to work on collections, where I think even the Corporation Council and I would both admit we have people who work on it, but it's a component of their position. This is the position that the Treasurer is requesting that this would be their responsibility, is to go after the collection process with people who have not paid their bills. Moving on to capital grants. Really the large capital grants this year are for the University and Northmore intersection, so that's $3.92 million. That was a federal Tri-County Regional Planning Funds grant for the reconstruction of the intersection. The police have $625,000. This is looking for the construction of a multi-purpose storage as well as moving their firing range to this facility. And then they also have $300,000 for general police technology, so that's things like computers in the squad cars, those kind of things to just make sure they're most up to date on their technology. In terms of operating grants, and as I will say, these are always the things that we know of at the time the budget is, we become aware of it. Sometimes this moves as we get through the process. Right now we have $2.4 million anticipated to be spent for co-response as well as a vehicle task force next year based off of the allocations that we have. From a federal standpoint, we also have CDBG and home funds. So we have CDBG of around $2 million, home of $665, and ESG of $135. These are in line with what they have been in the past. It is an area that I know we're going to have to continue to monitor on a federal level in terms of those dollars, but that we have those in the budget right now, assuming the federal component. If for some reason that does not happen, obviously we'd have to come back and have a conversation with council, but we are treating these as if we will get the federal funds next year. We also have our support to other agencies. So we have $542,000 for the Convention and Visitors Bureau. We have $1.2 million for the Civic Center. As a reminder for the council, that $1.2 million, however, is the floor of our contribution to them. It really is based off of the overall collections for HRA taxes. I believe this year is going to be closer to $2.1 million. I anticipate it being slightly lower with the closure of the facility next year. But the $1.2 million is the required floor per the agreement. We have Arts Partners for $100,000, Downtown Development Corporation for $100,000, Greater Peoria Economic Development Council for $75,000. We have the Peoria County Animal Control Services for $282,875. We have Springdale Cemetery at $250,000, and then Emergency Management for $42,000. In terms of the 2026 Community Investment Plan, as we talked about earlier, there's $48.9 million in total capital improvements. Of that, 62.7% of that goes towards roads, sewer, and sidewalk, as well as traffic. So we always say 62.7% of that directly impacts our citizens. It's the things they're using every day. The other 37.3% is for tools, technology, and facilities. And so I kind of, as we kind of talk through this, how we budget for facility improvements, so improvements, whether it be at City Hall, whether it be police substation, that is work that we do. We budget in 2-year intervals. So 2026, we will budget for facility work. We anticipate that work will be done over 26 and 27. There will then be a request for additional facility work in 28. And so this number, while it can seem like there's a large number that is not direct impact, I would also argue some of those are still direct impact to the constituents. But this is one of our years where we are planning on facility work, unlike some years where, really the odd number of years where we don't do facility work. In terms of the 2026-2030 Community Investment Plan, we have the $48.9 million this year. We have $62.7 million in 27, $75.9 in 28, $44.0 in 29, and $37.2 in 2030. The increases in 27 and 28 are due to the storage work that has been discussed with council as part of our CSO obligations in 27 and 28. Obviously, there'll be more conversations with council as we go, but from a planning standpoint, those storage tanks are included in those areas. It's why you'll see the sewage and drainage number those 2 years have jumped substantially. Very quickly going through the major capital projects. So we have $6.9 million for the University and Northmore intersection. This is our every other year also for our large fire fleet replacement. So these are actually an item that the fire chief has brought to you before. Because of the lead time, we're about 2 years out from being able to procure vehicles. So the chief brought this to the council back, I believe, in 24 for this approval. So this is that $3 million for that fleet replacement for their apparatus. We have $3 million for the new police building. We have $2.6 million for the Adams and Jefferson signal upgrades. So this is kind of as we're getting closer to the end of this project, this is the remaining funds that we have. We have a little bit over $2.5 million for general fleet recapitalization. So this is going to be vehicles for public works, community development, police, really outside of the fire area. We have $2.2 million for Moss Avenue from Western to Sheridan, $2 million for Sheridan Road from Northmore to Giles. We have $2 million for stormwater fleet. So as we've expanded our operational components of the in-house work we're doing on the stormwater utility, there's been a need for vehicles. So that is where that fleet recapitalization is. We have $1.8 million for the MacArthur Highway from Jefferson to the bridge. We have $1.57 million for the Hickory Grove Road from Knoxville Avenue to Hickory Woods. We have $1.56 million for the Richwood Station 2 rehab. We have $1.2 million for combined sewer overflow reductions for years 5 through 7. So these next three are really the pre-engineering work as we look to what our obligations are under the CSO. So for years 8 and 9, we have a little over $1 million. And then for years 12 through 14, we have $1 million. We have $1 million for demolition and clearance. This was an area that we had previously been funding with American Rescue Plans. So we have figured out how to include this in the budget. With that funding source going away, we still have $1 million towards demolitions. We have $950,000 towards facility improvements to all of the fire stations. We have $705,000 for street light upgrade and signal replacement on Southwest Washington. We have $675,000 for renovations here at City Hall. We have $650,000 for parking deck improvements. We have $500,000 for the fire training center that the fire chief is looking to be able to expand their ability to do training. We have $500,000 for our pavement preservation program, and another $500,000 for sidewalks and ADA ramp projects. And so those are really the larger capital projects that are slated for 2026. And so we'll kind of move on to the next piece, which we look at debt. So from a debt perspective, our overall debt payments, so this is already issued debt that we have to make our bond payments on. The overall payments decreasing $453,000 the next year. So that's really where that payment is lower compared to 25. We are recommending as part of this budget to issue new debt in the total of a little over $8.9 million for capital. So the capital plan as it's laid out, we bring in about $7 million in funding for our general capital program. $3.5 million of that immediately comes off the top for debt obligations. So as you start looking at the request for capital, outside of our roads, sewers, everything else, whether it's our fleet, fire fleet, facility improvements, we have to look at debt options, or we have to look at finding funds other places. And really with kind of the future we're looking at in terms of our public safety pensions and wanting to continue to use our reserves towards that purpose, we are recommending to issue this debt for those additional capital projects this year. And again, this is really heavily driven for those facility-related projects. So this is a debt request that we only bring every other year to the council. At this point, we don't anticipate a request for 27. So really, this is a debt issuance that would fund these projects for both 26 and 27.
And how long will it take to end that debt?
So more than likely, we will issue a 20-year bond.
20 years?
Yeah.
Okay.
Usually, we tie it to the useful life of the assets. And so usually the average age on those is 20 years.
Okay.
In terms of fund balance, currently the projected fund balance in the general fund at the end of 2026 will be $56.7 million, or 43% of operating expenses. I think the good news when we look at the general fund for next year, we also have a general fund budget that's in balance. We have a small surplus of around $17,000, but we do have a surplus for 2026. Due to our anticipated growth in pension obligations, what we have been recommending to the council has been to assign that excess amount or the amount above fund balance policy of 25% towards future pension payments. At the end of 2026, that amount that we'd be assigning to that purpose would be $23.7 million. Overall use of fund balance, so this is all of the city's funds, we're anticipating to use a little over $3 million in fund balance. That's heavily driven in really our capital project areas, so sewer, stormwater, capital, where a lot of times we build up a reserve level to go out and do projects. And so we're really, from an overall standpoint, we're looking to use about $3 million in reserves next year. I know these are slides, and we're getting towards the end. These are slides you see me talk about a lot, and kind of looking through the lens of what's coming down the pike for us still or those risks that we have in terms of our expenses going forward. And so one of the areas I always like to look at is when we look at our overall general fund revenue, what is really the percentage of that overall revenue that, if all else being equal, we had to dedicate towards our public safety pensions? If we didn't have the associated levies for it, we had to do it strictly out of the general fund. How much of our general fund is it making up? And as you can see, we anticipate in 26 that our public safety pension contribution at $39.3 million, that would be around 30% of our general fund. And why this matters is what we continue to see, and it's actually in your budget book, and we have a multi-year review of this, is when we fund public safety pensions, we really fund it with three revenue sources. We fund it with PPRT, we fund it with property taxes, and we fund it through general fund transfers. What we have been seeing, obviously with where PPRT has been, we've been seeing that that's been reduced to a point it's more difficult to rely on that to offset some of our costs. Even with the large growth that we've seen in assessed values, the amount we're able to levy for our pension funds is also, for the most part, not covering the increases we're seeing in our payments. And so we're having to do more and more money out of the general fund in form of a transfer to meet our obligations. And so I just always think this is important to remember in the context of this conversation as we start to see the ramp up. Because as we get closer to that 2040 number, or that 2040 year of being 90% funded, it's going to get more expensive. Because we're not only are we paying normal costs, so the normal cost to pay the pensioners, we also have to make up the existing unfunded liability. The good news, and I did include it in your budget discussion, is this council's commitment over the last 4 years to fund the pensions based off of the actuarially requested amount has smoothed the curve. If you remember from previous years, we talked about a peak payment in 2040 of $81 million. The good news is that's down to $58 million. I know that probably doesn't sound like the greatest news when it's still $58 million, but it is down substantially. And so continuing that trend of trying to fund it at least the minimum of what the actuaries are requesting will continue to move us on that path. Within the budget this year, the one thing we are recommending is, if you also remember in some of these conversations in the past, we had anticipated what a normal cost growth was going to be. We anticipated our overall growth is going up an additional $500,000. So last year, the overall contribution went up $2.7 million is what our contribution went up last year. So based off that cost growth trend, we had assumed our contribution would go up about $3.2 million for this year. Good news is it actually only went up 1.4. But we are recommending that council consider making an additional contribution to the plans to still contribute the $3.2 million to help us continue to shave off some of that peak at the end of the pension window to try to save us some money in the long term. Because if we can put the money to use in the plans to earn interest, in theory it should help us in the long run. The one recommendation I think from a staff perspective we would make to council, if council was amenable to that request, is we would request that we don't make that additional contribution until December of next year, wanting to make sure that the revenues come in as we anticipate. We're not going to put ourselves behind the 8 ball from a financial perspective if for some reason we do end up in an economic pullback. And so we still would make that contribution, but wait to make it until December to make sure the revenues are there. And obviously we would report back to council when that was going to occur. When I looked at this and, I've worked with the actuaries for both the pension plans, Foster and Foster, and worked on creating kind of a tool to help, I think, better inform me to be able to better inform the council on really what decision-making around pensions does. And so when I put in the additional $1.8 million, what that really meant is that it would save us $1.2 million over the life of the plan. While that may not seem like it's gangbusters amounts, every dollar does help us in this process to try to meet these obligations. And so to me, the $3 million we actually would be able to save on our long-term liability is worth it for the $1.8 million that we would contribute above and beyond the request. So that is a request that the staff does have, and obviously we'll look for council's direction on that. It is included in the budget, but that is an area that we're looking at recommending to council this year. The only other area I wanted to just kind of bring up, and it's also in your budget book because I know it comes up in conversations. There's been a lot of discussion over the last couple of years at the state level looking at some reversion from the Tier 2 benefits for public safety back to some form of Tier 1. What exactly that looks like, it may not be a full reversion, it may be something different. But because of this, the kind of the pension and funding tool that we have now, what I can tell council is if we went back to a full Tier 1 reversion, that would cost the city $90 million between now and 2040. You want to extend that out to the overall actuarial window, which goes out another 25 years, it's $362 million. So it is a substantial amount of money. It is just really some information I wanted to equip council with as we have some of these conversations with our state legislature about we already have these challenges, we're moving in the right direction, but this would make it worse. And so that's kind of in that information, but kind of wanted to highlight that as, you know, we're going to be getting into start talking about we'll talk about the spring session again, and I'm sure there'll be bills on this, and I just want to make sure we have the information to provide to everyone of what that cost is going to be. In terms of the budget outlook, so this is our overall sources and uses. So sources is your revenues, uses is your expenditures. Really long-term, what we have, when I look at this in a way is we have relatively a structural deficit long-term in how our budget is set up. Sometimes we get one-time revenues that help offset those. And we have been, and this council has been very diligent about being conservative with some of the one-time revenues we've got over the last few years, which has helped us to be able to do some of the things we're talking about. But long-term, what you can see, right, is based off current growth patterns, you start to see the red number, which is your expenses, exceeding your blue line, which is your revenues, and the spread gets wider and wider over time. Because we do have a situation where, in general, our expenses growth is exceeding our revenue growth. Something we're going to have, future conversations about as we kind of work to bridge that gap in the long term. It's not a funding issue this year. It's not a problem. It's not really a problem for this year's budget. But really long term, this is what the trajectory is. I think just a couple items I would just address with what this model looks like is as you look at like 27 and 28 compared to 26, you'll see a reduction in revenue. I think it is wholly possible that sometime over the next few years, we probably will have a business cycle correction. We've been in the same business cycle now since 2011. We're due for some form of pullback. I think everyone thought it was going to happen a couple years ago. But the Fed did a relatively good job of unwinding their balance sheet, and we avoided an inflationary recession. So from a conservative standpoint, I just want to make sure, we're not over-promising in what this projection looks like. The economy does well, that number is going to pop up, and the difference between the two will get smaller. But I just wanted to kind of share that there was about a 3 to 4% pullback in our overall revenue, which, really the last recession we had to look at is the 08 and 09 timeframe, which was a relatively extreme recession. That revenue pullback at that point was between 8 and 10%. So I kind of have that in the middle of it, kind of what that would look like. The other thing is when you look back at 29, as we complete all of the remaining debt that we have on the Peoria Civic Center, back during COVID, there was a $4 million loan that was provided to the Civic Center. And so we will be recouping that in 29 as their debt gets paid off. So there's kind of a one-time influx of revenue that we won't have really in future years. This outlook also assumes post that debt that the Cascade of Funds agreement with the Civic Center stays as it is. That's what we have to work off of. It's the agreement that we have. Obviously, that will be a conversation with the council as we get closer to what that looks like. But that's also an area that some of that difference could get smaller. but we got to work off of obviously what we know and agreements we have in place right now. But, just from the finance director's perspective, I always get a little nervous when I start looking at charts like this because I really know long-term what that means. And it really is, I think, to me, the reason why the budget presentation that you have in front of you is really modest in terms of the request from the staff, because we're trying to be sensitive to trying to not reach what this might look like in 29 and 30. And so that's why we're still trying to be modest with what the budget request is. In terms of the general fund balance, really kind of the same picture. 2029 is the year in which we would cross over that 25% amount. I think the good news for the council, if you remember these conversations, originally we had this pegged as 2028. And so the strong performance really driven by the general fund this year has bought us another year of being above fund balance policy. But again, we're still on that path that the decisions will have to be made in the long term. And then just real quickly, this is the timeline that we have laid out. So tonight is a kind of our initial conversation. I know this was a lot of information to take in, and we'll open kind of the floor for report backs from council. Next Tuesday, we have the public hearing on the budget. We plan on having continuing budget discussion on October the 14th as well as the 21st. We also will have the Truth and Taxation hearing on the 14th as well. I usually like to have those at a regular meeting, so we'll have it on the 14th. The hope and the request from the staff is to finalize these discussions and any changes the council wants to make to the budget at the meeting on the 28th. And then to come back at the meeting on the 4th to adopt the budget, the levy, and all the associated ordinances with it. But obviously, this is a process that's driven by council, and so we will work through the process with all of you. And that's really what I have to kind of go through with the budget. I know that was a lot to get through, but we're open for any questions or report backs from the council.
Thank you, Director Craddy, for that comprehensive overview. I'm glad you brought up the Civic Center, and because, we've had some discussions with them about their ongoing needs and the issues with the elevators and the escalators, and from my understanding, the escalators and the elevator or comes up to about a $4 million need. So it's interesting that you talk about recouping $4 million, but currently, staff doesn't have any recommendations in this proposed 26-27 budget for Civic Center. Is that correct, Mr. Manager?
Yes, ma'am, that is correct.
Okay. So that'll be part of our discussions as we move forward.
Yes.
Thank you. Any questions for Director Craddy or the City Manager? Councilman Allen?
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you, Director Craddy. Please get a bottle of water after that elongated presentation, but very, very thorough. We really appreciate it. My questions are a little all over the place, so I do apologize. So I'm going to do my best to go through my chicken scratch here, but just wanted to make sure I'm understanding some of the things that you were saying. First, I want to begin with our debt snapshot. And I know that we have bonds set to come off the books in the future. You said the Civic Center bonds are set to sunset in 2029. Is that correct?
So the payment itself halves in 2028 and is fully paid off, other than the issuance the council did back in 22, in 29, and the remaining amount is about $1.6 million for that issuance.
And then so that 1.6 will come back to the city after that?
So we'll still have to do, through the cascade of funds, that will still be the number one priority, is we'll have to continue to pay that for the next 16 years post. The agreement that we currently have for the cascade of funds, however, as it's currently set up, once that debt payments roll off, the final group on that cascade is the Civic Center itself. So as that agreement is currently laid out, the funds that are no longer being spent for debt obligations would go to them for their needs.
So if I'm understanding this correctly, we won't see any savings there because it sounds like we'll continue to be paying the 1.6.
I think what staff's recommendation would be is that this would be a discussion we would want to have with the council long-term of what that looks like, based off the needs of the Civic Center as well as the needs of the city. Just from a planning standpoint, I don't put it in the budget as that because there's not been that policy level discussion with the council yet.
Yeah, no, understandable. And it sounds like 2029, we potentially have a perfect storm of, once the pension obligation increases, we're going to run into our fund balance possibly getting below that 25% number as well, too. So I know 2029 is a year we're going to have to look out for. Now, we also have bonds set to sunset for the library. Is that correct?
Yeah, those sunset in 2027, except for a very small portion that got reissued back during COVID, but it's about $2.6 million of their bond payments come off the books.
Okay. You talked about we're now able to forecast cannabis projections because we have 4 dispensaries within the city of Peoria to a tune of about $1 million within this budget. Are you able to share how much of a surplus that is based off of what we received the previous years? Because I know we've had dispensaries around. I mean, is this now an extra $750,000 or $500,000, or are you not able to share that?
What I can share is this year because we got that dispensary. So we're sitting this year at about 950 is where I'm anticipating us being.
You said how much now?
950,000. What you are seeing, and this is going based off of both really what the state is seeing and just the market conditions, is cannibalization of the market as well as the overall market isn't growing overly fast. So the cannabis sales tax that the state collects and they remit had been growing at a very large pace. IML's projections is that number is closer to 2% for next year. So as I think the dispensaries have grown throughout the state, there still is just a basic level demand for it that no matter really how many there are, this is what the demand's going to be. And that growth of that demand just is not growing overly fast in Illinois.
Yeah, and I'm sure there's some other competitive retail options as well. Going into our pension obligation, I know you recommended that we should remain aggressive with our pension obligations, and I agree with that as well too, because we know that is an ongoing issue. The last two comments or questions that I have is, you mentioned that the forecasted pavement preservation fund for this year is $500,000. Is that down from last year?
I don't have that off the top of my head, but we can get that information for you.
Yeah. And the reason why I say that the pavement preservation program, I enjoy it. I know that it's a way for us to repair roads. Roads are very expensive,
Yeah.
and I know a little bit more about a chip seal or a slurry seal than I used to. And $500,000 for all 5 districts just sounds like not a lot of money. And so just wanted to know if that was a decrease from last year, and if so, maybe we should look into that, because those projects are very important to repairing roads in our district. And then last but not least, it's saying that revenues right now are looking at $298 versus $301 million in expenses. So to the average person that's listening right now, how is the city going to balance its budget?
So we have, in essence, reserves, or as I think for someone at home, it's going to be their savings account, right? We have reserve levels of around $130 million. A lot of that we will put towards kind of, as Councilman Sears has said before, our rainy day fund. That's really for, some form of catastrophic event. That's equating to, about right now $50 million in the general fund. The rest of the reserves that we have are dedicated for specific purposes. And so if you look at really the areas that we're seeing most of the change or the use of fund balance is going to be in sewer, stormwater, in general capital. Some of that occurs because really most of the work we do is on a cash basis. And so for some of these projects, we have to build up enough reserves to be able to do the project. So it's pretty common for us to run deficits in those funds as long as they're not getting to a point where they're putting us in a negative position from a fund balance standpoint.
Awesome. Well, no, thank you, Director Craddy. Again, I appreciate the information. And I guess as a report back, if we could just get some context on the pavement preservation fund. Again, I think that's a very crucial fund to repair those non-major arteries in our roads. So I would love to see that fully funded if possible. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
You're welcome. Councilmember Gordon Young.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I followed you. I believe I did. There was one area where I think I got stuck, and it was trying to figure out what CPI was, which I believe is another word for possibly inflation.
Yes.
Consumer Price Index.
Yep.
Can you speak to what that might look like in terms of the stormwater fees increasing?
Yeah, so right now, the estimate for this year is around 2.9%. So an increase of price, or an increase of really about 2.9% is the amount that we would be looking to take from the stormwater utility. From an average homeowner standpoint, that's around a couple bucks a quarter. It's not necessarily, it's not going to be $50, $60 for the average person. It's probably $10 to $15 a year.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
You're welcome. Councilmember Regenbach.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Director Craddy, for this incredible presentation. And thank you to all the department heads who participated in this and going through the strategic plan and linking budget priorities to what we have set as our plan, I think is one of the most helpful things that we've seen come out of this process. So I think kudos to all of you sitting in the gallery tonight. And I also think as we look at the good year that we've had in 2025, and the good couple years we've had, that we need to recognize the employees, the rank and file employees that actually implement the strategies that we put forward. We've had a nice influx with the ARPA funds, and it's been easy to make some of these budget decisions in the past few years, but I think our staff has worked harder than ever, and I think they really deserve a lot of the credit for putting us in the position that we are right now. So please relay that as appropriate to you department heads. I think of all the takeaways, this really does look like a good, solid budget. I'm sure we'll see some nuances as we dig a little deeper in the coming weeks. But the one thing that I think should be non-negotiable for us is our commitment to pay down that pension and to use that excess funding, the funds that we have, to cut that to me makes so much sense and is going to pay dividends for us in the future. So I really appreciate the focus on that and encourage my colleagues to make that one of our sacred commitments as we move forward. And looking at the fund balances and things, I think Councilman Sear and I will kind of be smiling about thinking that the solid waste disposal fund will actually be in the positive here in the next couple of years. That's something that I think we need to give the landfill committee a lot of credit for, in the new landfill agreement and the hauling contract that we also approved. So those kind of things don't happen by chance. Those happen by planning and being strategic and having a plan and keeping to it. My last comment, I guess, would be supporting what Councilman Allen requested in a report back for the non-arterial road pavement preservation And also, I think the ADA sidewalks and sidewalks in general, as our Public Works Director likes to remind us, we do have a degradation curve in our assets here, and that's not going away. So if we could look at possibilities of, I would say even doubling each of those to $1 million, I don't think that would be unreasonable. The 500,000 doesn't do a lot of sidewalks, as we all know. So I'll close for now, but again, thank you for a comprehensive look tonight, and great job in putting this together for us. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Well said. Councilmember Seer?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Director Craddy, thank you very much again for a great presentation. I came to this meeting tonight with about 100 questions, and now I'm up to about 500. So I'm not going to ask all these questions, obviously, because it will be here. You're welcome. I don't want to be here that long, but I want to make just a few maybe comments and ask you a few questions. Number one, because it's important to understand, and I'm sure you got the answers to this, so that's why I'm asking the question. Can you tell us how many changes that we made to the budget in 2024 or 2025?
I would say on average, in terms of budget amendments, we average probably 10 to 20. It's very more heavily driven recently when we get grants, acceptance of grants. If we have more grants accepted, it's closer to 20. I would say we're closer to 10 if the grants are just not there.
Okay, so it would be fair to say maybe 1 or 2 per month.
Yeah.
Okay. So would it be fair to say that when we agree on a budget, our budget is as good as the day we vote on it? Would that be an accurate statement?
That is an accurate statement.
So to take your words, and I want to use a few of your words, and you used many times before tonight, that you talk about being cautious, about safety, about bad times coming in the future. One word you did not use tonight that kind of disappoints me a little bit is, to Mr. Allen's question, example, 298 to 301 is $3 million. You did not say that we could make some cuts. You did not say that, but that's one of our options, right?
I think from this perspective, this is the budget the staff has put together. It's always the prerogative of the council to make cuts to that. If council wants to get to a fully balanced budget, that is a discussion we can have.
Okay, thank you. So I just want to make sure that people know that. The other thing, I'm never happy with the answers about the Civic Center, our debt, not the Civic Center, the debt load, okay, that we have. And I was not really happy with your answer to Mr. Allen. So in 2028, when the Civic Center debt is paid off, okay, on this line somewhere in the book, 3-ring binder, will show like $2 million for another 15 years. Is that correct?
Correct.
My understanding, please correct me if I'm wrong, I know when we made the loan to the Civic Center, the reason we're able to do it is because we're only paying interest only up front. Is that correct? That's what the $2 million is. We're just paying interest only. That's how we're able to make the loan. So in 2000, that was the first 5 years. So in 2028, we'll have to pay interest and the capital back, correct?
We had discussed that when we had looked at it originally.
I should say the principal, sorry, not capital, but principal and interest.
I believe we ended up pretty much straightlining the principal and interest payments. It might fluctuate a couple thousand a year, but my memory of the debt structure on this is we're looking at pretty much 1.6 million for both principal and interest. That first payment that we had that year was interest only, which is very commonplace when you issue debt, that your first payment you make is interest only.
So is that correct, Mr. Manager? The first 5 years with interest only, and then we'll do principal and interest later?
I'm going to have to look at what the repayment schedule was and get that back to you. I just don't recall off the top of my head what that was.
Another question would be on, let's talk a little bit about new issues. Okay? When we're doing some bondage. bonding. So $8.99 million, who makes the rules of where we gonna use capital money or stormwater, or which account we're gonna, who makes the rules of where we're gonna invest that $8.9 million?
So I think with the kind of the question you're asking is, why isn't some of this in stormwater, or some of this in sewer, or some of this in garbage?
Correct.
Really, the rules are based off of state statute. They're based off of governmental accounting practices that they have to actually, the work that's being done has to be towards the source of the revenue. So for example, if it's sewer, it has to be work that's being done on our sewer infrastructure. If it's stormwater, it needs to be done on our stormwater infrastructure, and so on and so forth. And so the 8.9 million is really looking at things that are, as we kind of look at them as general capital. So they are things like vehicles, facility improvements, those kind of things that don't necessarily have a dedicated revenue source in another fund that we have to unfortunately lump under general capital. And so that's what I was getting at a little bit with, we generate about $7 million a year through gambling receipts, through some of our utility taxes, and a few other ancillary revenues that are dedicated towards that capital fund. But it's not necessarily enough to cover more than the debt we have, which is about 3.6 million, and a few items here and there. So that's really where that deficit comes from, of having to look at issuing debt for our general capital, because they really don't fit anywhere else in those buckets.
So my understanding for these loans or these bonds is that they need to have, they're all 20-year bond, correct?
Correct.
So they need at least a lifespan of 20 years or a depreciation schedule of 20 years.
That is correct.
That's correct. So that's very important. Now, there's a few, I'm not going to go through them, but I'll sit down with you guys the next few days. There are some of these loans where we're using the money from these bonds that do not, in my opinion, do not qualify. I know they don't have a 20-year lifespan or depreciation schedule, so I'll probably have to revisit with you guys the next few days about that. How many assets does city own that we have that generates a revenue for us? I mean, it's kind of a weird question, but it's important. Would parking deck generate revenues for the city?
Yeah, we obviously have our parking decks.
What else would generate revenues to the city?
Some of our sewer infrastructure would, some of our stormwater infrastructure would. You could quantify as, a revenue generator for us. I wouldn't necessarily sit here and say our roads, for example, are going to be a revenue generator. That's just a general asset. I can do a little bit more thought on that and get a little bit more detailed if you'd like a report back looking at it. Because I don't want to act like this is, my thoughts right now are holistic to those assets.
The reason I'm asking, Madam Mayor and Mr. Manager, is I think we make the rules, right? Some of these rules we made many years ago about the 20-year depreciation schedule and all that. I'd love to my colleague to think about having the same rule. If we have to issue bonds, which I'm not a big, you all know that, and I don't like issuing debt. But if we have to, maybe my colleague, my mayor, can think about, maybe we'll issue bond to only things that have a minimum 20-year lifespan and something that generate revenues to pay those bonds. Would that be maybe a good discussion to have, Mr. Manager? Or, I'd like to know how many, because then we can have bonds for, let's say, the parking deck, because I know we're going to get some revenues back. So if we have bonds for something that, for a building, for a building that doesn't obviously generate any revenue, maybe we could have that discussion if this council is interested into. But I was just thinking about that. How can we, if we're going to bond something, how are we going to pay it back besides, our capital and capital fund? So I'm all over the place. I'm trying to just maybe another comment or two. You talk about all that stuff. So in the big picture, if I understand correctly, and please correct me, so real estate taxes will go up this year, right, a little bit. Stormwater utility, the staff is asking for the CPI increase this year, correct?
Correct.
Garbage, so the CPI, tell me about the stormwater, I mean, how much money we're talking about? If we use the CPI, my understanding was our revenues will go up by $500,000 roughly, is that correct?
That's correct.
Garbage fees, $1, how much money would we raise from the garbage fee?
Probably another 300 to 400,000.
Okay, I'll put $400,000. Sewers are going up because of CSO. How much are they going up roughly in the budget? In my understanding, it's another $500,000.
That one gets a little trickier. We are recommending about a 3% increase in the lateral fee, which is the fee for general operations. The CSO rate and the rehab rate, because we have the 3 individual rates with sewer, really as the CSO rate has been going up, we've been decreasing the rehab rate, so really it's at 3%. So I would say, yeah, probably in the $300,000 range on the lateral fee.
Okay, so between those three, well, not including the real estate taxes, but just the stormwater, garbage, and sewer, we're looking at maybe an additional $1.2 million, okay? $1.2 million. So what I'd like to see, Mr. Manager, as we have more discussion next few weeks, is now our constituent, beside, I mean, it's not a lot of money. We have this, it's $1 a month, whatever, but it's $1.2 million total. Then our constituent having higher water bills. They're having higher energy bills. They'll have a higher real estate taxes bill. I mean, I think it's just a bad time to have all these increases, especially like to Mr. Allen's point, there's only a $3 million difference between 3.1 and 301 and 298. If you add my $1.2 million, you got $4.2 million. I'd love, to Mr. Ringenbach's comment, to have a balanced budget where you're still going to have to issue some bonds, but I know we can easily cut $4.2 million in expenses from our budget and have a true balance budget, even with these some bonds that we'll still would have to issue some bonds, which I'm not excited about, but I'm willing to compromise. Why? Because I'd like to be safe. All the words that you used tonight, okay, we don't know about the future, okay? I'm not as positive as Mr. Riggenbach. I mean, I am so scared of our pension, okay? I would like to pay the minimum in the pension, not the maximum. Why? Because our budget is only good for the day that we accept the budget, that we vote on it, and that budget will change at least a dozen times next year. Hopefully we'll get a lot of grants that are not in the budget right now, and that will increase our revenue. I mean, how much grants we had last year? Millions of dollars in grants. So maybe we might get some more, and so we'll naturally increase our revenue from grants. That way we're playing safe, okay? I mean, to think that our governor is looking at canceling the Tier 2 to Tier 1, that's going to cost another $60 million. For me, I'm like, okay, I don't know about the future. I mean, it's already impossible. Okay, we're going to have to issue tremendous amount of bonds down the road in 2033, 34, whatever, 8 years from now. I know we'll have, whoever is sitting in these chairs, we'll have to make a tremendous big decision about how much bonds we want to issue at that time to pay, to live up to our commitment. So to me, it's like, why don't we just pay the minimum right now and use that $1.2 million example just to cut all these raises that we want to give our constituent? To me, that's a fair argument, because I just don't know what our governor's going to do in the future. I don't know what anybody's going to do in the future. So why don't we play it safe? So I want you, Mr. Manager, Madam Mayor, and all my colleagues to just think about that. Let's play it safe, and hopefully we'll have a good year next year, and we'll get some more grants, and we can get, have more things to do. I mean, that's the way I would prefer to think about it. I mean, it's great. I mean, we just don't know. I don't know, and none of us know exactly what will happen until 2040. Why don't we play it safe for our constituent, and instead of raising fees and taxes all the time, why don't we just take a little break? Madam Mayor, I know we're going to have 4 or 5 weeks of that, so that's enough for me for tonight. Sorry I took so long, but thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Seer. Point well taken. You know, one discussion that we have had off and on is a few years from now, in the early 2030s, is possibly bonding to pay down our pension liability. If we had a cap on 20 years, we probably wouldn't be able to do that. But again, point well taken, and I think some perception is paying down pension debt now is playing it safe. So it's going to be a good discussion. I look forward to it. Councilmember Kelly?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And I've said it to you privately, I guess, Director Craddy, but publicly, I just want to commend you once again for a terrific budget book. Very understandable. It's just really good. I don't know if I want to say it's easy to use, but it's I think a very good effort, and I appreciate it, and I think the council appreciates it too. Have a few questions. Number one, in your presentation a little bit earlier, you budgeted the right side, or the result side, at full employment. Okay. Was your base from the year before, was that also full employment, or was that the real number?
So the budget that was approved was full employment. The projected is based off of the actual performance. So that is going to include individuals not being in the seats and turnover occurring. So I would say, if you're looking at in terms of reduction from budget for turnover reasons, we're probably in the $3 million is what that turnover component was this year holistically for the city.
Okay, thank you for that. Getting this, I guess this is sort of budget related, getting to the Civic Center, municipal corporations, churches, not-for-profits in general, just turn up their nose at the idea of reserving for depreciation. We really got smacked a couple of years ago with the Civic Center. The amount of work that had to be done there was enormous. And we helped them out somewhat. It was, but when you don't set money aside, this is what happens. Is there any stomach for reserving for depreciation in an asset like the Civic Center? So that when things happen, they have the money.
Yeah. This is something I even wrestle with city assets. Other places that I have worked have, in essence, funded their depreciation into a reserve fund for future replacement. It is an avenue I have not gone down here, because I will be honest and say it's going to be a very large number.
Yeah, I'm sure it is.
And it is an exercise I have contemplated, but just have not had the opportunity to really go down that path. Because usually that requires a commitment to fund out of the general fund or whatever funding source towards that reserve. If that's something council would be interested in having an understanding of course, I'm more than happy to kind of review that and give an example of what that would look like. I would just warn council, it's going to be a large number.
Yeah, I like to say sometimes that one of the rules on institutions of any sort is that they never have enough money. They can always use more money. Actually, families are the same way. Households are the same way. Being responsible for what your needs are is harder than spending every penny you got. And so, okay. I'm a little disappointed, as usual, because we have a 1% deficit, $3 million deficit for this year, and about $1 million for 27. And it seems to me that ideally, we should have a balanced budget, but we never do. And we're so close. We're so close, and yet, yeah, we always go over. It's just maybe an editorial. Okay. This is a minor thing. If you look at page 61 of the budget book, general fund transfers for 2026 is $9.75 million, and it's repeated down there in the text. We go to the next page. It's I'm sorry. The total is 39.4. Okay. You go to the next page and it's 39.2. It sounds like a small amount, but that's a couple $100,000. Is that, if I'm reading it right, is that, am I right in my interpretation?
You are correct. I will have to look and see where the calculation, it should be the 39.2, because that is what's in the financials. Let me do a report back on which bucket that, it won't take me all that long. I'm more than happy to get that to council in terms of which one of these buckets is more than likely overstated. Okay, and you don't have to get too excited about it because I've got a source of funds for you. Well, I might as well get there because that'll be kind of fun. Page 198 and 199. This has been a pet peeve of mine since I've been on the council. Okay? City Council. Our budget is $27 million. City Council. I guess I could buy a new suit. I mean, this is crazy. What is it we're paying for here? How does the City Council have debt service? City Council has for 26, I mean, I don't know why going through these numbers, they don't make any sense. Personnel expense of $339,000. Benefits expense of $5 million? I could really make some money by getting sick. This would be great. Actually, I don't use our medical. But Director Craddy or Mr. Manager, why can't we get for City Council what ought to be here? Where does all this money go? It doesn't go to the City Council or to buy us paper or paper clips. I will admit I share in your frustration because I had fixed this. And so the council budget really hovers around $450,000 is what it is the overall budget. In our financial system, we had moved this into the culture and recreation area, which is, it really functions as kind of an admin area for the general fund. I have to go back and look at why this produced in this way here, because it shouldn't have. So I will get that corrected as a report back to council. But the council budget really does kind of sit at around 450,000.
Yeah. And as I said, alluded to before, if you need that extra 200,000 for the previous item, well, you can take it out of our budget. We've got room.
As I said, the health insurance is getting expensive.
Yeah. And also, as far as the report back, I'd like to know where this money actually goes. This is real money in our real budget. Where does it go? It sure doesn't go to the city council. Is this a slush fund or something?
No.
This looks funny.
This is not a slush fund.
Okay.
It's just simply a reporting issue.
It certainly is. Okay. All right. Thank you for that. Let's go back to page 103 and 4. The OPEB. We have on 103, we've got revenues coming in, $1.2 million and $1.4 million, and et cetera. Okay? And then the lower graph on 104, we only have 1 year where we're spending money. That's projected. That's $1 million. Okay, my question is not, I don't want to get into the weeds too much because I don't understand all these weeds. But if we don't spend this money, does it just roll over?
So,
and so there isn't a contribution the next year, as it seems like it indicates on page 103.
So the OPEB fund, so the Post-Employment Benefit Fund, it was a fund that was created to offset future liabilities for retiree health, is really, post-employment benefits, which majority is health.
Yeah.
And so the amount of revenue, the dollars we have in there are tied to a calculation that we have to do every other year to look at what that obligation is. Historically, we've been getting to a point where we were able to fund it up to that liability. The expense in 26 is going back to that conversation about how much our health insurance costs have increased, is one of the areas we've seen the largest increase, as well as us having a difficulty recouping costs from, is our retirees. Mm-hmm. And so in reviewing our most previous OPEB report, we were in a position that we had assets in here or cash above our liability. So what staff is recommending is using the fund as it's intended for and helping offset some of that cost increase for our benefits, specifically for those retirees. And looking at using the fund in the future for those purposes as long as we're meeting our liability requirements. So that's why that's the only year that you have an expense. It's a recommendation we're making to use those funds as we see that they're intended for post-employment benefits.
Actually, I didn't. Okay, so we have significant fund balances.
Correct.
I mean,
our liability right now for our OPEB liability on our books is around $36 million.
okay, so do our retirees have a health plan, right? Or they have Medicare or
So they are eligible to stay on the city's plan.
Okay.
They, in essence, have to pay anywhere from 90 to 95% of the premium.
Okay.
So in a lot of ways, yes, they are paying for their insurance. But because we are in a self-insured world, in terms of how we live, our costs are still our costs. And so what the actuaries do is they're looking at that, number one, and saying that we're not obviously able to meet, because of how state statute is written, we're not able to meet or get enough in terms of revenue from the retirees to cover that. The other component is we are not allowed to charge what they call age-adjusted premiums, and that is considered to be an implicit subsidy when it comes to OPEB. So when the actuaries do their analysis, they're looking out 20, 30, 40 years. They're looking at me retiring and saying, what's really the cost of the city in the long term when I take insurance in the future? And so it's really like, I know it's a little bit of like a difficult area to kind of for everyone to wrap their head around exactly. But really it's about that future liability. And we just want to be prudent with when we do use the money in the fund. And I also would just say the revenues are also a little high because if you remember, we loaned money from here to pay it down in the last early retirement incentive that the city offered.
You mean borrowed money?
Correct.
Yeah.
So we are paying ourselves back for that. So that's where that's where the large amount of the revenue is coming from.
It seems, is this a, is this a favored place from which to borrow money outside of the budget where we figure we'll get paid back?
Correct.
Yeah, I thought it seemed that way. All right, thank you. Okay. A question for either you or for the manager. In our TIF increments, are they increased by inflation?
So, obviously when the assessor does their process, they go up based off of actual growth. It's a little hard for us to articulate exactly where it's going to land because it's not like a traditional levying process for us. We get what we get based off the growth. What I can say is this last year, the growth was above CPI substantially. Now, some of that was in the East Village TIF, is the OSF Cancer Center is taxable. So obviously that was a very large increase to the East Village gross sales TIF value. But I would say if you look around, you look at warehouse, you look at conservation, we probably averaged close to 6 to 7% in overall value growth last year.
Well, let me just put something forward on this. We've got a TIF. Its EAV goes up 5%. Okay, and let's call that $500,000. Okay, but there's something that was built whose EAV is $100,000. Okay, so there's another 400,000 that's spread across the entire TIF where nothing happened. Okay, so it wasn't something newly built. Do we count that as increment?
Yes.
Is that okay? Okay, I'll just editorialize. That's really unfair to our other taxing bodies because nothing was built, but inflation happened, and we get the full benefit of that, and we didn't earn it, in my humble estimation. Okay, thank you for that one. Okay. We did the city council, didn't we? this is just a question, it's not an accusation. Police and fire, we had a pretty good decrease in contractual obligations. 16% lower for 25 and 26% or 17% project, I'm sorry, this is page 223. 17% projected for 27. I'm not complaining, but those are pretty big chunks. Is there an easy reason for that you know of?
So with police, obviously during the budget process, we do our best to go through all their grants and figure out timing and how things are going to get spent. Police department's done a great job over the last few years of getting grants. We just anticipate slightly less grant money, and a good chunk of what they're doing, whether it's the co-response model, that's a contractual relationship with Carl. So we just have anticipated less spending through grants that are contractual.
Thank you. That makes sense. Thank you. Even makes sense to me. So, okay. And in SSAs, am I reading this correctly, that with an SSA, the city will borrow money, or will perhaps borrow money, give the proceeds to the SSA outfit. We will pay municipal bond interest. They will pay municipal bond interest. Okay? So here's this outfit. This is like the old revenue bonds before they made them taxable. You know, number one, the taxpayers are funding this thing. These people, these poor developers aren't funding it themselves. When we do an SSA, do we require that shopping center outfit show us their books to say, are you just taking advantage of our taxpayers and our borrowing ability, and you're just going to make more money? Or are we saying, uh-oh, if we don't do this, something bad's going to happen?
What I could say to that is I have not been here during any of those negotiations when it comes to any of our recent SSAs, so I can't speak to that. What I will kind of speak to with the SSAs is we do structure those that, yes, a lot of them have sales tax components or hotel tax components that are funding a component. All else being equal, if those revenues do not produce, it is on the developer through a special property tax levy to pay for the debt. So we are protecting our interest in carrying that debt, that the developer has to be the backstop of that funding and not the city and the taxpayers for that bond obligation.
Yeah, I'm most concerned about our citizens who are having to pay more versus developers who may not need this, but hey, we're in the business. Let's go to City Hall. This way, we're going to reduce our costs. And I don't blame them. If that's the system, well, great. It's like free money, but I don't know that we should be doing that without a lot of due diligence. Okay. And that is all I have. Director Craddy, thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Welcome. There are no more questions. I do want to ask Director Craddy, since we're likely anticipating a federal government shutdown, will there be any financial impact to the city of Peoria?
I think if we have grants that are sitting out there, it's going to have an impact in getting repayments made, and that obviously depends on the length of how long that is closed. I would say while the shutdown itself will have some impacts, the continuing resolution and funding decisions will probably have more of an impact. Just because we already have seen the grant landscape change in terms of requirements and even cost share. The environment is changing for governments. And so I think more what comes out of a shutdown will probably be more impactful than probably a short-term shutdown.
Okay. Thank you. Councilmember Seer?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just one more question. Director Craddy, tell us about, I'm reading one of the slides here about collection effort to unpaid debt. Do we have where does it fit? Do we have a line item for account receivable?
So we do carry accounts receivable. It shows up in our audit every year. There's always going to be a line for accounts receivable. We have policies that look in terms of, age of the receivable and the likelihood associated with that collection. Doesn't mean we stop collection efforts, but from an accounting standpoint, we have to have good faith estimates. And so that accounts receivable number that you're going to see in the audit is probably lower than what we're attempting to collect. It's just what we have to provide from a financial statement to our bondholders, the public, what is probable that we will collect.
So Mr. Montalongo wants an extra person to try to collect some of these funds. Again, in the perfect world, I don't know if it's going to happen that way, but if we would collect, I'm looking at, for my budget, $4.2 million somewhere. If somebody collect $4.2 million of debt, we could have a balanced budget. Is that correct?
That is correct.
You show that as income, right? I mean, what's the procedure? How would you account for that?
Yeah, so it gets kind of varied, and obviously Corporation Counsel is also very acutely aware of these conversations of how we go after our debt obligations. Obviously, if it's a traditional homeowner non-payment, we start sending collection notices. At a certain point, we will send them to collections if they're not paying. If the value of those get high enough, we start to consider leaning properties. But it does kind of change. I think kind of from a context standpoint, if you look at stormwater, which is kind of the area that we have labeled here as an area we'd want to focus on with a position like this, there's about $8 million in uncollected. And so they would have to have close to a 50% collection rate to get to your 4.2 million. I don't know if that's necessarily a realistic number. I would say, obviously, them collecting enough to cover what we're paying, plus some, maybe it's in the neighborhood of $500,000 would probably logistically make more sense as a target versus half of it.
Okay. And last question, I had a short discussion with Mr. Manager before the meeting started. Let's talk about debt again. So we have $21 million or so, right, of bond that we have to pay. Let's talk about this CSO, because obviously our EAV, it's at $2.3, $2.4 billion, correct? And we're allowed to bond 10% of that amount of money, correct? So down the road, some of us starting next year, we're going to have $30, $40 million of loan that we're going to need. So talk to us a little bit about that. Where will we get the money, and where does it show on our balance sheet?
So the loans are EPA loans, so they're not part of our debt, so they're not part of our debt limit calculation.
Okay.
So that's number one. Number two, that's assuming that we're going to continue to have the U.S. or the Illinois EPA's revolving loan fund that we'll be able to tap for these projects. So number three, if you look in the debt service schedules in the sewer fund in the back of the book, it shows the anticipated increase in the debt service to pay that back. So what we have always, the plan that we've been operating under is that we're using sewer funds for the construction. We're borrowing the money from the IEPA, but we're using the sewer funds to pay those loans back, and then operationalizing any of those expenses using the stormwater utility fund.
So thank you very much for this explanation. So hopefully I won't be here, but in the future, 10, 15, 20 years down the road, do we have 100% certainty that we'll have to bond for our pension and bond for the CSO? Is that 100% sure in your estimate?
Well, I think that I don't have 100% surety, but, I think that we'll have to continue to look at when the time is right for us to look at the projects that we're doing, trying to minimize the impact and cost of those projects over the long haul. And that ties back to the fact that we've got two major issues, one a state unfunded mandate in pensions and one a federal unfunded mandate that are kind of coming to a peak at the same time in 2040. So ideally, we try and look at how we can stretch those out where we can, utilizing whatever financial tools are available to us.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. And Mr. Manager, Director Craddy, thank you and your entire teams for putting this budget review together in the presentation tonight. Thank you very much. We don't have a motion to receive and file. I guess that was not necessary. It's not on the agenda.
So when we change the rules, the council rules, this is a continued budget discussion that will go on until we wrap this up the night of the 4th, hopefully.
Okay. Madam Clerk?
We're at citizens' opportunity to address the city council, and we have not received any cards.
Okay.
So then we're at executive session.
Okay. I would like to invite a motion to adjourn and to convene in closed session immediately following the adjournment of the city council meeting pursuant to the Open Meetings Act 5 ILCS 122C11 to discuss pending litigation or probable or imminent litigation and pursuant to Open Meetings Act 5 ILCS 122C21 for approval by the body of closed session minutes. Moved by Councilman Euler, seconded by Councilman Kelly. Please cast your ballots. Councilman Carmona? Councilmember Carmona? Carmona? Your ballot. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you for your service.